Big part of what I've been working on over the last few years. I've been in this position since 2015. We changed focus in that time to more brook trout centric and wild trout centric work for my position. So I've been looking at where we have brook trout that we didn't know about before, and reevaluating the populations that we already knew about. And one of the big things I've been trying to do over the last couple of years, particularly since the range-wide genetics paper came out, we have a large portion of the Ohio basin native brook trout. And I've been looking at that side of the state rather than the Chesapeake Bay side because our portion is underrepresented the way I feel in that range-wide paper because we have a lot of overlap. We have stream capture events noted between where we have potential southern strain populations, northern interior populations, and Chesapeake Bay populations. So we have a lot of mixing zone historically between those populations. So I've been collecting data, over 4,000 fin clips at this point at 102 sites, working with Amy Welsh at WVU to get a contract to analyze those. And also been working on the western margin of our distribution. We saw on that earlier map of the 2000 distribution, a lot of West Virginia was unknown. We know a lot more now, and based on that data from 2005, looks like it was pretty reasonable that that western margin was already known. The 500-meter elevation line pretty much demarcates that western extent. It's also the change in a physiographic province. We go from the Allegheny Mountains to the Western Allegheny Plateau, and that really changes the geology and everything. So brook trout are not as going to be as prevalent in those areas. And reiterating some of what Dan said, based on some of Forest Service's long-term data and some of our other longer-term data that we have, and point surveys, we are also seeing some dramatic range reductions, particularly in the southern part and the western part of the range. I don't know if it doesn't really show up on there, but you can see the little X's on the map, and those are places where I've done surveys where there have been brook trout in the past, and we have not been able to collect any specimens from those areas. So there is concern there as well. So we've been doing some population restoration work, mostly over this way in Eastern Panhandle. Brandon Keplinger has been doing some great work with the Reymann Farm aquaculture facility. It's a WVU facility that we have taken over. These little guys here on the left is a screenshot from his Facebook page. Those are this year's fry. They're growing like little weeds. I haven't seen an update in a while. How are they doing, Brandon?
Pretty consistent. We have some Flavorbacterium issues from time to time.
Okay.
But yeah, we probably have in excess of 1,000 right now.
Oh, nice.
Allocated for about 3 different strains.
Okay. So probably some of those same streams that are already listed.
Yeah, some will get a couple iterations for sure, especially those Eastern Panhandle ones where it's a die roll.
Yeah. And so this year we'll probably get back into some of those streams and survey, see if we have survival, growth, see if we're getting any reproduction in those. Big part of what I do also is limestone sand improvements. Across the state, we've improved and restored brook trout populations in over 300 miles of streams using that. This year we're looking at the headwaters of Red Creek, a really big brook trout system in Dolly Sods Wilderness. We have access, very difficult access, into the remote headwaters of it just outside of the wilderness area. And hopefully we can get adequate amounts of sand in there to help restore more of that stream. It's still got modest population in it, not a very good fishable population, but if we can improve the alkalinity in there just a little bit, we should have opportunity to create a tremendous brook trout fishery in Red Creek. And we've done some translocations. We've got a couple of barriers where we've been doing limestone sand work. Populations weren't moving upstream. You know, a little bit of footwork. We found barriers, just move, 50 to 100 fish at those locations over those barriers. And they've succeeded in doing well. One stream I found last year, Mill Run, we found some fantastic habitat, no brook trout, no dace, no sculpins, nothing. We're like, why aren't there any fish here? We did not do the footwork on that, but we went downstream where we had other access. We moved over 50 fish above the barrier or above the perceived barrier. And we'll see what how that population does this year too. They should take off. They should have taken off because the habitat, water quality, everything was ideal. So this is the movie. I don't see an active button on there to hit it, but we did the closest thing we've done that I've done to stream restoration in this stream was Fork Glady Fork with the Forest Service last year. Chad approached me, Chad Landrist with Mon approached me a couple years ago, said, hey, can you help us on this project? And so I offered the equipment and labor, and they had on the boots on the ground folks out there to oversee the project. And we did about a mile of stream restoration, all large wood. We just, we had it was an old grazing allotment from the Forest Service that had been terribly degraded, beaver impounded. We had a mile stretch in there that didn't have any brook trout. We had brook trout above and below, temperatures warmed up, no brook trout. So hopefully with these massive wood additions, we can hold substrate, raise the water table, cool off temperatures going out, maybe create some rearing and adult habitat in this section, and see an increase in brook trout occupancy in this reach. So we can play the movie at some point if we want to. That's a shot from Monday. It's a little challenging working up on First Fork, up on Cheat Mountain. We got out, we're going to do another project with Forest Service this year, improve about 2 miles of First Fork, a lot of wood going in there. It's a limestone treated stream, traditionally a very good brook trout population. Even with the alkalinity and good pHs we're maintaining in there, we don't see the bump in productivity that we think we should see. Some research has shown that these streams, we thought there's probably phosphorus limitation, but the research shows they may be nitrogen limited, which is hard to believe in our landscape that anything is nitrogen limited. But apparently the landscape sequesters the available nitrogen and it doesn't get into the stream course itself. So if we can add just bulk amounts of large wood into this, and Forest Service is going to do an additional 4 to 5 miles upstream of where we're going to be working, doing hand work. We'll be in there with the machine. They'll go up into the headwaters, smaller parts of the stream with a lot of hand work. So if we can load enough wood in there, we can increase the nitrogen cycling in that system and improve the fishery. A lot of AOP planning, infrastructure bill, tons of money coming down the pipe. We don't know how to take advantage of it, where to spend it, but we're always looking at projects. This is on Mill Creek, Cambria State Forest. In the original 2005 assessment, it was one of the only green subwatersheds in West Virginia, the only one west of the Potomac Basin. So that is not a year-round barrier, but obviously it is a barrier at those flows. The only time it's not a barrier is when flows are extremely elevated. That goes over to a small campground. DNR owns the property. We hold the deed to it, but we do have some loose commitment from the Corps of Engineers. Had a couple engineers out there look at it, one a private consultant, one within our agency. We think we can create an alternate structure, a bridge structure, create alternate ingress into that campground and remove this puppy for about $250,000. So we thought it was going to be at least $500,000. we can do it for 250, that'd be great. And I've got over 30 other low hanging culvert fruit to try to pick off. So the other thing we're going to be talking about, trout management plans. We've been working on this for a few years. It is done. I have a paper copy with me. We can look at it. It's not available for public distribution yet. We work with the public stakeholders. We come up with 7 focal issue areas. Those are outlined at the right there. One of the most important ones is the enhancing native and wild trout fisheries. We came up with 7 objectives, 23 strategies within that. And it's the biggest part, it's probably the biggest chapter, the biggest section of the plan as far as background and action items. So within that plan, I came up with a new trout stream classification. It looks fairly complex on the surface, but if you notice, there are management schemes outlined. There are only 4 management schemes I've identified to achieve that, to work within that classification. And ideally, those are to protect, conserve, and enhance the native and what we have regarded as native brook trout fisheries. Management scheme B would be to implement management strategies to improve native and regarded native brook trout components of the fish community. Favor brook trout over any competing species. Management scheme C is to manage to maximum recreational fishery potential through using any combination of physical, biological, or chemical means. So we're just trying to improve, whether it's put and take fishery or semi-wild fishery, fingerling supported fishery, whatever. And management scheme D is implement management strategies to improve native brook trout where present. They may be low abundance populations without being detrimental to the overall trout fishery, and skew actions toward brook trout favor when feasible. Now, we all know there are some places, and we stock a lot of fish, and in some places we stock where there are some remnant or even some good native brook trout populations. Some of those would be favorable to quit stocking. Some of those would not be favorable to quit stocking. So that's where this mixed management scheme D would come into play. And also within that, I looked into wildness because we're always talking about wild fish, wild streams, wild populations. And so I came up with this continuous spectrum of from everything from pristine to completely non-wild domestic fishery. And that's what I came up with. It goes from green, from high quality native brook trout population, and all the way to the far right, maybe seasonal catchable stock impoundments, where there's no expectation of wildness. And these are just descriptions of the 0 to 8 along the spectrum, how you might describe those. And within the scope of the plan, we talk about special regulations and how to use those regulations to improve our native brook trout and other wild trout. My objective, this is not an objective with the plan, this is my personal objective, is to get one no-kill patch at some level, hopefully a 3rd order stream level or larger in each Huck 10 watershed. Probably not really achievable considering some of those Huck 10s just have very limited brook trout populations in them. More achievable is probably 2 to 3 of those patches within each Huck 8. And Brandon and I have talked with others, with Chad, about length restrictions in the state. We do not have a current length restriction. Our bag limit for brook trout is 6. So we are considering how to balance harvest in some areas where harvest is totally appropriate, like Seneca Creek, just chock full of age 0, age 1 fish. We can harvest those fish quite heavily, but everybody harvests bigger fish. Literature shows that slot limits aren't really that effective for brook trout, but we might try an experimental slot there. So we're just still in discussions on how to approach size and bag restrictions. And I guess that's all I got.
Thank you, Dave.
Mhm.